Hello, everybody. Welcome in. I see some people in the Q&A section. Hi, Gerard. Hi, Ananya. Hello, Ava. Hi, Paige. It's good to see all you guys in here. Lots of people. Hi, Ian. Hi, Shanna. Yes, I am Quinn, Shanna. How did you guys do with the assignment this week? Hi, April. I had a lot of fun reading this assignment. I thought there were a lot of interesting parts. Yes, I said your name right, Shanna. That looks like one that's not always said right. Hi, Nia. Good. Aubrey says it was good reading it this week. Gerard, you're on chapter 2. Nice. Ian, you were reading it just now. Good. Nia, I'm glad you're excited. I'm excited too. I like to read. Gerard, yes, the book is called Wonder. It's a great book. So we'll get started with talking about how this opens up. The beginning of this set we read was one of my favorite parts of it because it talks about when he goes, do you remember when he goes to sit down at lunch? It's his first day at middle school and he sits down and it's lunchtime and everybody's sitting in their own little cliques and they say, no, somebody's sitting there, you can't sit there. And so he ends up at this table all by himself. And then a girl comes and sits down with him. And reading about that part was one of my favorite parts because it really showed how much of an impact somebody can have just by being willing to be somebody's friend. Gerard says her name is Summer. That's right, it was Summer who went and sat down. Shanna says, I like it when summer comes. That is the start of a new friendship. Absolutely. I think that it totally was the start of a new friendship. And it was really easy to see in the book how much that meant to him to have somebody who sat down and just wanted to talk to him and be his friend and wasn't sitting there in order to be mean or to make fun of him or to make a joke. Milo says, the summer table. That's right, it's the summer table. I don't know if I would be accepted. I don't think my name connects to summer, but maybe if I was nice enough, they would let me in. Gerard says, my favorite part is when he first got to middle school. Yes, I loved that. Yeah, so I thought that was really beautiful. And one thing that it made me think about was how we can make that a part of our lives and seeing how much of an impact Summer made on Augie just by being willing to sit there made me think about, well, in my life and in our lives, what kind of an impact can we have on other people by being willing to do things like go and sit with them. It's somebody that you don't know, somebody who you see as new and shy. Go sit with them, say hello, be a little bit interested in their life. I thought that was pretty beautiful. So if you want to put in the Q&A section some ways that you've seen in your life that people have either done that with you and helped you feel welcome and at home, or ways that you've helped other people in that way, or ways that you would like to see people helping more, I would love to see that. Ananya says, another thing I liked is that Summer didn't sit with him just to show sympathy or have pity on him. She genuinely wanted to make friends. Absolutely. I think that was probably one of the best parts of it, was that she really did genuinely want to sit with him. And it just goes to show how much it means to know that somebody is really interested in you and cares about you. Somebody says, Shanna says, when I was younger, I thought that August was a fall month. I thought so too. I used to get fall and autumn and August all mixed up. Somebody says they became friends instantly. How is that possible? That's a good question because it does seem a little bit odd, but if you have been lucky enough to experience it, you know that sometimes there are people in life where you start talking and then it just goes and it goes and it goes, and you talk about one subject and you're like, oh yeah, I used to have a dog too. You're like, I love dogs. And then an hour later you're there and you're talking about whether or not you would go to Mars if you got the option. And you just find somebody that's really your kind of person and become friends. So it's not often that it's like that, but sometimes that does just happen. Has that ever happened to any of you guys with your best friends or some people that you were really close with? Helene says, yeah. Gerard says, it takes a lot of time for me to make friends. Sometimes it does go the complete other way. And I have friends who I hated at first. And then it turned out that they became some of my best friends. But it did take a lot of time for me to be willing to be like, oh, okay, you're actually not a bad person. And you're actually pretty funny. And you're actually pretty nice. Okay, I guess we could be friends. Evan says, when I was new to my actual school, everyone wanted to be my friend, and I teamed up with some guys that were nice, and I made games with them. That's awesome. That's a great way to make friends. Shanna says, I remember when I was in first grade, I was like so shy and almost instantly had 2 friends. The first one that talked to me was named Nopiras. Tell me if I said that wrong. And the second one was Haley. That's really beautiful that you were shy and they came and became your friends. And I'm sure that you reading this could definitely relate then, seeing somebody who is willing to just step in and be the friend. That's really beautiful. Gerard says, how do bullies become your best friends? Well, it's a little bit of a funny question, but it's a legitimate question because sometimes it does happen. And I think what's behind that is that nobody really wants to be a bad person. There's something that they're like, oh, it's safer for me, or they feel a little bit like they're not strong enough, so they want to make themselves look stronger by making everybody else seem smaller, or something like that is going on with them that makes them want to be mean to you. But if you are willing to be the one to be their friend and understand them and listen to them, sometimes it does happen that they can become your best friends. Yeah, so that's definitely a good question. And so it's possible. I read this book once many years ago, and I don't remember very much of it, so I'm reading it again now. So who knows? Maybe some of the guys like Julian, who wasn't very nice to him, maybe he'll become his friend in the end. Who knows? No Pyrus is how you say it. Okay, good. Thank you. Milo says, I have known my friends for literally my whole life, Elizabeth and Theo, and I'm glad it happened because I do homeschool and I don't have the choice to make friends at school. Wow, Milo, that's awesome to have friends for your whole life. I really like when you have that kind of friend and they just stick by you and kind of are with you through everything, and then they already know your whole story and your whole background. And that totally makes sense with homeschool. I think probably Augie went through a little bit of a similar thing of not having the choice to make many friends at school because he was being homeschooled. So it's definitely a bit of a challenge, but it can be nice when he had his friend Christopher, and so they became close and they stayed close for a long time. It's really important to keep those connections. Evan says, my friends' names are Iker and Alex. Alex is a boy. Nice. Those sound like good friends. Gerard says his best friend is Christopher. Yeah. Ananya says, what if you don't want friends? I think that it would be a good idea to make some friends because sometimes it's nice. Gerard says, and both of them were homeschooled. That's right. Christopher and Augie were both homeschooled. So that might have been part of a point where they had some familiarity with each other and they understood what the other person's life was like because they both knew what it was like to be homeschooled. April says, my friend Daphne, and the instant we met, I knew that we were like pretty much the same. We became friends instantly. I also think my friend Milo is on this class. Yes, Milo is in this class. That's awesome that you guys know each other. Yes, there are totally those people where the instant you meet, you're like, wow, this is my new best friend. And that's always a lot of fun. Milo says, what is your background? This is Central Park because the story takes place in New York. So we decided that Central Park would be a good one. And then we can pretend that we're reading outside in the park. Shanna says, my sister and I are like best friends sometimes, then other times we're mortal enemies. I have a little brother and it's very much the same. Most of the time now we're best friends. Not so often mortal enemies anymore. Gerard says, I met my best friend when I was 4 years old. Wow. That's pretty awesome to have a friend for like your whole life. Milo says, hi, April. Aubrey says, my friends' names are Sienna and Autumn. Oh, so you have Autumn is a little bit like Augie. Autumn could probably sit at the summer table. Okay, anyway, we'll move on a little bit from that. So that's one part that I thought was really interesting of how you can impact somebody's life. And I would like to challenge all of you to focus on this a little bit and pay attention to when you have the opportunity to be the summer person for somebody else and see somebody else who's shy or looks a little bit uncomfortable, or you can see that other people are kind of picking on them, and be the one that decides to be their friend. Because you can see pretty clearly in the book how much of an impact it had on him. And I think it would be really beautiful if we could all have that impact too. Helene says, is Adria here? I haven't seen anybody named Adria. April says, yeah, I have a brother named Lorenzo and we fight a lot. Yeah, my brother and I used to fight a lot too. But eventually we got past it. Gerard says, we like the same games, TV shows, foods, toys, and other stuff, him and his friend. Wow, that's awesome. Nia says, I'm really enjoying this book. I am too. I think it's a really touching story, and it has a lot of things that, as much as it's interesting to see Augie going through it with his particular situation, there are also challenges that everybody has to go through, like going to a new school and meeting new friends and being kind of the odd one out for a little bit. And it's interesting to learn from that story. Gerard says his friend's name is, I don't even know how to pronounce his full name, but Timmy for short. Nia says you can connect with vocabularies just with the vocabulary. It's very emotional. That's totally true. That's one thing that's really interesting, is the kind of vocabulary they use. And you can tell it's written like it's from the viewpoint of a kid. It's not written like an adult telling a kid's story, which is sometimes really good, but sometimes it can feel like an adult telling a kid's story, which is always going to be a little bit different than how the kid sees it. But this is really written from the viewpoint of Augie and the viewpoint from Via, and it does definitely help you connect a lot better. That's something interesting to think about if you're writing also, is, okay, how can I really immerse people in this story? Well, talk from the point of view of your characters. That might be a good way to really get into it. Use their vocabulary, talk the way that they would talk. Milo says, it's been really hard to see my friends recently, so I do a call on Zoom every day at 8 o'clock. That is really cool. I really love that even though the world is kind of crazy right now, people have found ways to connect. And I think that it's really important that you're keeping those connections strong and really hanging on to those friendships and continuing to build them. And that's pretty beautiful. Gerard says, I have two sisters, and I don't know if I'm supposed to have favorite siblings, but I fight the most with my favorite sister, Olivia. Olivia, like Olivia in the book. She's also the sister. She's a bit of a tattletale. That's pretty funny. Shanna says, when I see someone who looks like they're lonely, I remember when I was in first grade, and then I try and be like my first friends. It's a bit hard for me because I'm shy. Wow, that's a really great thing to remember. And it definitely is hard sometimes to be the shy one. But if you see somebody else who looks so openly like they're feeling shy and lonely, and they feel like they don't know what's happening or they don't know who they can be friends with, no matter how shy you are, if you're the one who goes up to them and says, hey, what's your name? My name is Shanna. My name is Quinn. And be their friend, they will not even know that you're shy at all. And it will probably help you feel a little bit more confident too if they're already shy. April says, I just realized, where's Corey? Good question. Corey couldn't be here today, so I'm doing the webinar for this week's book club, and then Corey will be taking it back over. Gerard says, I try my best to keep track of all my friends. Do you? Yes, it's really hard sometimes because they go all over the place, and especially in times like this when everybody's not together. But I do try to keep track of all of them and kind of know what they're doing and stay in touch a little bit. And it's nice that we have things like the internet and texting and social media to keep track of them and to stay connected. Gerard says, I have a lot of friends. I want to make a list of books. That would be cool. Books that you can read with your friends. Yeah, it's always really fun to read books together with people. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Mr. Brown's October precept. That was interesting. He says, if you remember this part, he's writing on the board and he talks about what a precept is. It's like a rule to live by. And he says he's going to give one for every every month. And then the one he says in October is your deeds are your monuments. And that one was pretty interesting to me because I think it's really true, is that you can say as many things as you want and you can talk about, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this, which is fantastic to have goals and start talking about them and creating them. But if you don't really do anything, when you move on, what's going to be left behind? Not a whole lot unless you get something done and really put it there. So what that said to me was to stop with the talk and stop with the thinking about it and the planning and just get to doing things and start creating products. And when you have the chance to do something, take the chance and do it. If you have the chance to go sit with that person, do it. That deed will be part of your monument. If you have the chance to do some really good schoolwork and be like, wow, that was the best paper we've ever seen turned in, take your chance, do it. If you have the chance to build a rocket, build a rocket. Yeah, so I thought that was cool. Shanna says, I'm in a scouting group and we have a Zoom call every week on Wednesday, so I get to see my friends. That's awesome. That sounds like lots of fun. Milo says, because of social bubbles, I have been able to actually see my friend Elizabeth in person. Wow, it's really nice to be able to see people in person. I never would have thought that I would miss seeing people in person so much, but I had to quarantine because I left and then came back and just as a precaution, and I really did miss seeing people in person. Ian said he missed the precept. Can I say it again? Yes. His precept was, your deeds are your monuments. Gerard says he's traveled to 5 countries around the world and I have friends from all over there. Wow, that's pretty incredible. Paige says, my pet fish, Twilight, and I are sharing this class right now. That's really adorable. I hope that Twilight, your fish, is enjoying the book. Evan says, I sometimes speak by WhatsApp to my friend. Yeah, WhatsApp is a great way to communicate, especially if you have international friends. Aubrey says, we are on chapter the Punnett Square. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Let's see. Yeah, I think that is where we got up to. And that one, yeah, that is right up where we're going to read next. Gerard says, is it true that our most important precept is who we are? That's a good question. That's a question that you all kind of have to answer for yourselves, because things like what is the most important are questions that can't really be answered by one person to say, yeah, this is what's true for everybody. This is what's the most important, because it depends on who you are. And for some people, who they are might be the most important thing. For some people, how much money they make might be the most important thing. And you'll see this when you start interacting with different people throughout your lives and in all sorts of places in the world, is that different people will have different importances, and it does shape who you are and how your life is a little bit. Evan says, are you feeling cold? I'm not actually, but I'm wearing a green shirt, so I realized I had to put my jacket on because the green screen was giving me Central Park on my shirt. Shanna says, I'm on apples. Is that one of the chapter titles? I forgot if that is. She says she thinks so. Yeah, what page is that on? Anyway, back to the precepts. I think that it would be interesting to all come up with your own precepts as you're reading the book and see kind of what you think would be interesting. I think that mine from this week's section would probably have something to do with helping the lonely people and being the one to be the friend. Maybe something like speak first. Oh, she said she has a different version, so I don't know what page it's on. Well, where we got up to in this version was page 104, and it's when they're talking about the genetics behind how Augie came to look like he does. Gerard says, have you ever traveled into different countries and made friends from each of the countries? I went to France once, and I did end up making a friend there that we stayed in contact for years after that. And it was because I was there and I didn't speak very much French, and she decided that she would be the one to speak first. And she came and talked to me. And then we ended up spending the whole night together, and we talked a lot and had a great time. And then we exchanged contact information and continued to talk for years. Did you know that pen pals are your friends? Yes, they totally are. Shanna says, I have 602 pages and I'm on 143 and 144. We have, or at least I have in the copy that I'm reading, this has 404 pages and I'm on page 104. So I think we're around the same place. Yeah. Another part that I thought was interesting was when it actually goes off of the subject of Augie and it starts talking from Via's point of view. And I thought that that was an interesting addition to the story because it starts talking about not just how this circumstance impacted Augie's life, but how it impacted the people around him. Because it isn't just one person that these kinds of things affect. It's often their friends and their family and the people around them. And it kind of has a balance of it impacts them, but they also have a huge opportunity to impact the situation. And by being very supportive and by making it into something that's lighthearted and something that can be dealt with and making it something that's overcomable, they can become a stronger team or a stronger family or a stronger group of friends because of a challenge. And I thought that was pretty cool. Let's see. April says, I didn't get the book yet, so I'm still going to read the whole book when I do get the book. Yes, that sounds like a great plan. You're totally welcome to sit in for the webinars and then read the book, or read the whole book and then sit in through the rest of the webinars, however you guys want to do it. Gerard says mine has 572 pages. Wow, sounds like we have a lot of different copies. Shanna says I'm not on the Via part yet. I have a way to go. Yeah, that's totally okay. Gerard says it comes in different volumes. I think there are some different versions of it. Milo says, I love to read and I'm in 6th grade, but I have an 8th grade reading level. Wow, Milo, that's awesome. I love to read too, and I think that that's an important thing to do, and I think that it's definitely a good thing to love. Especially if you are in a time like this and there are not a lot of things that you can do out in the world. A really great way to stay in touch with it and to experience things outside of what you can experience at home is by reading, and reading through other people's experiences and reading about worlds that you might never be able to experience here. It's a great way to stretch your imagination a little bit. Gerard says, I'm on page 192 of my book. Where am I on my book? I am on page 104 of this book, but it's a different version, so I'm not sure how that matches up. Shanna says reading is one of my favorite things to do, and April says reading is my hobby, and Gerard says reading is my favorite hobby. I totally agree. I think it's a really beautiful thing. It's a great hobby to have. I think it's also really useful as somebody growing up to be reading a lot, because at least for me, as I was growing up, it was a little bit challenging to be able to learn about places in the world that I wasn't, or places that I couldn't go to, or people that I would never have a chance to meet because it was too far away from my world. But by reading, I was able to still be a part of that and really learn about those places and those kinds of people and those parts of history. So I think it's a great hobby to have. Gerard says, friends like you for who you are, right? Yes, I think totally. And I think Summer's a good example of that, because she liked Augie not for what he looked like, but for who he actually was. I think that was really cool. Shanna says, I read a lot. And April says, but art is my favorite hobby. Ooh, that's a great one too. I think you could even combine the two if you're interested in like writing as a kind of art, or visual arts. You can make art for books. I think that's really cool. When Via started going to high school, I thought that was an interesting transition also, because she got to see kind of who her friends really were and how they treated her and what their viewpoint was on why they liked her, because they kind of changed over the summer, right? If you're up to the point where you're reading about Via. It was probably pretty challenging for her to go back to school and realize like, oh, my friends are not totally my friends anymore. And it's pretty sad and unfortunate that that can happen, but it can happen. And I think the important thing there is to be willing to say, okay, well, they're changed, and realize that it's either your job to help them stay true to who you know they really are. And if you know that they really are a good person and a kind person, but they're not showing that to the world, to help them get back to that and be like, hey, you used to be really kind. Let's get back to that. And what happened? What changed? How can I help you? I think that that's a challenge to go through, but I think that she could make it through that in the story. Gerard says, I'm not from the United States, I'm from somewhere in Africa. Wow, that's pretty cool. April says, oh yeah, I'm making a book called The Pirate Land. Oh, wow, that's exciting. Are you doing all the art for it as part of what you like to do with art? That sounds so cool. I think that's a good use of your time if you have plenty of time while everything's kind of closed down. Yeah, for sure. There's also, you can see in the book, Via likes reading too, and she talks about War and Peace, which is a book that she's reading, and it is a little bit of a higher level book. But you can tell that it's an important part of her life too, which I thought was cool. Shanna says, I am also writing books. That's really cool. I don't think I've ever written a whole book. I think I've started to try, but I never really made it through. Aubrey says, what page are we supposed to read? So the first, I guess I'm not going to say a page number because we all have different versions, but the first assignment was up until the chapter lunch. And then the second week, which is the one that we're talking about now, was up until the chapter, the Punnett Square. We just finished the chapter Genetics 101, and we're in the section where Via is the one talking instead of Augie. And then for this next week, we're going to read, in this book, it's going to be up until or through page 154. But if you don't have this version, then it's up through the chapter, through the end of the chapter Partners, up until it says Detention. Shanna says, I have a short story that I've written. That's so cool. What's it called? Ananya says, another thing I like about this book is that there are different perspectives. Like, it's not only Augie's, but it includes Via's, Summer's, and all the other characters' points of view too. I find that really cool in the book. I really agree. I think that's a really important thing too, because it kind of helps you see how things can look different to the rest of the world, even if it feels one way when you're experiencing it. And reading a book from one point of view, you kind of experience it as if you were going through it yourself. But when it introduces multiple points of view, you can get a bigger, more thorough picture of what's really happening. And I think it's an interesting exercise to try and do that with your own life, as you, of course, have your own perspective and you can see yourself going through life. And when challenges hit you, you're like, oh my goodness, this is the hardest thing ever. But looking from another perspective, it might be just as hard for somebody else to see, how are they not understanding this? Or it might be hard for them to watch you going through a challenge, or they might be facing another challenge themselves and think that they have the hardest challenge in the world. So it's interesting to try and exercise that, and almost like you're reading a book, see the other viewpoints. Shannon says it's called The Storm. Ooh, that sounds intriguing. Milo says he's writing a short story. Wow, we could put together at the end of the book club, I feel like we could put together a whole library of short stories from the book club. That'd be so cool. Milo, what is your short story called? Gerard says, do your friends want you to be like them or yourself, Quinn? My friends definitely want me to be like myself. I have my friends that I've met here have been some really good people, and definitely the kind of people who will come and sit with you first, and they're very encouraging to people to be themselves. Milo says, I don't have a name for my short story yet. Okay, well, I'm intrigued to hear what it is when you figure it out. Gerard says, I've made 7 books. Wow. We're getting pretty far into our library. Shanna says, are you a teacher or a student at Delphian? I'm a teacher. I teach our equivalent of grades 9 and 10. But I was a student at the school and I graduated here. So I have been a student and now I'm a teacher. Gerard says, my favorite is Diary of a Normal Kid, Escape to Paradise. Is that one that you wrote or one that you read? I'm familiar with Diary of a Wimpy Kid, but I don't know everything about that. Oh, you wrote it. Wow. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I think this is definitely a good thing to write books too, because reading them, you get other people's perspectives, and writing them, you get to share your perspectives with the world, which I think is pretty cool. And it's also a good way to do it through writing, because you can have a message. Like, for example, one message that might be in this book is not judging somebody by the way that they look. That might be a strong message in this book. And you could tell somebody, hey, here's my message for you. Don't judge people by the way they look. And somebody could hear that and be like, oh, wow, okay, that's really true. Or they could hear it and be like, okay, yeah. But if they read the whole story and they really feel the emotions of like what that causes in somebody when they can tell that people are constantly looking at them and judging them and making decisions about who they are before they've even talked to them. When you really feel the emotions of that, I think it has a stronger communication. So writing books is a great way for you to share your messages with the world. Adira says, I've made a book. That's amazing. Helene says, 8 books. Wow. Gerard says, I hope you like it. How do I send it to you? The email doesn't work. And so the links you share. If the email doesn't work, then I'm not sure, but I will make a note to figure it out, and I will get a way to you that you can send it to me. Shannon says you have 13 more minutes. Yes, wow, we're really running short on time. We have about 12 more minutes left. So if you have a part of this section that we read, or a section that you read that you really wanted to talk about, go ahead and put it in the Q&A section now so that we can get to it before we run out of time. Gerard says, can I share it through the public Delphian email address? I'm not sure which email address that is, but if it will get to the school and you just put a note that you would like it to go to Quinn, then I'm sure that would get to me. Yeah, if any of the rest of you have short stories that you've written that you would like to share, then I would love to see, and I'm sure that Corey would love to see, and it would be pretty wonderful for anybody who wants to read your messages and your books. Yeah, that would be awesome. And I think if you just send it to the public Delphian email address, that would probably work fine. Gerard says, I want you to talk about when Augie got his surgeries. Oh, that's an interesting part. When he was born. Yeah, so he did get a bunch of surgeries when he was born, and Via talks about it a little bit, of how all of the different parts of his face were modified and how he had to take some bone from another part of his body and put it in to give him a chin. And it was a lot. It was pretty rough, I'm sure. And I think it's probably interesting to be coming through that and to be having to get used to your body moving differently and feeling differently than you're used to it. So it definitely was probably a pretty challenging part of his life, but I think having parents who were so supportive and really there for him probably helped him a lot. And I'm sure that having his friends there too was probably really helpful. Evan says, I've got manuals and books. Very cool. April says, Julian is like Draco Malfoy from Harry Potter. Yes, if you haven't read Harry Potter, he's kind of like the bully, mean guy. And Julian is definitely like that. Gerard says they took a bone from his hip into his chin. Yeah, that's right. They took a bone from his hip and put it in his chin. But it gave him the ability to use his mouth better and to be able to talk more easily and to be able to chew and to be able to keep his tongue and his drool under control, which is something that we kind of take for granted, is that I can be talking and I don't have to worry about it and I don't have to worry about drool coming out of my mouth. And I take that pretty for granted. But it's an interesting thing to see that, wow, that is not really something that everybody can take for granted, and makes you appreciate all the little things, like I can walk completely fine, and I do really appreciate that when I remember to, but most of the time I take it for granted. But it's definitely something to appreciate because not everybody can. Helene says, boo, Julian. Yes, I agree. He is not the nicest, but you can really see like what Julian is saying and doing. It's really mean, but it's not unheard of. There are definitely kids like that. And there are definitely kids who will say things like that and not even realize how much they're hurting the people that they're talking to. So it's good to really be aware of that, and to be aware of it in yourself and make sure that you're not the one being mean, but also to be aware of the people around you and people who are making fun of other kids. If they don't realize how much they're hurting them, it might be your job to step in and be like, hey, knock it off. Milo's asking, what does for granted mean? Good question. For granted is like, you just accept it as, oh, of course I have that, and not really as something like, wow, thank you. For example, in a family that has very little money, getting to go out to eat for dinner might be something that they really appreciate, and is something that they're like, oh, wow, this is a special occasion. Whereas in a family that has tons of money, going out to eat is something that they wouldn't think anything of. So they're like taking it for granted that they can go out to eat. Gerard asked, Julian later becomes his friend in the book, right? I don't actually know, because I don't remember much from when I read the book years ago, and I've only read up to the end of what we did this week, so I do not know, but I'm excited to find out. Aubrey also says, boo, Julian. Agreed. Haley says, what pages are we supposed to be reading for this week? So the page numbers are a little bit tough because we all have different versions of the book. But we decided that we're going to do up until the chapter called Detention. And that's through the end of the chapter called Partners. If you can't find that, let me know. Gerard says, I mean, to me, Julian didn't mean what he called Augie. I experienced lots of name calling in my school. Yeah, and I think that's part of the hard part, is that I don't think he did totally mean to be so hurtful. And maybe a little bit he was trying to be mean, but maybe he wasn't at all. And maybe he knew exactly what he was saying. Who knows? But it's pretty rough when you hear things like that. Even if people don't intend to be mean, or they're not meaning to be rude, it can still hurt a lot. And so it's really important that we keep track of what we're saying and make sure that we kind of listen to how other people are going to hear what we're saying before we say it out loud, and kind of do the same to help other people do that too. Gerard says, starting from which chapter to where? So I've read up through the chapter called Genetics 101, up to the chapter called The Punnett Square, and then we're going to read until the chapter called Detention. Evan says, can we make one pulse caller? I don't know what that means. You saw the article. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Can you explain that a little bit more? Helene says on Kindle. I don't know what version you have on Kindle or what the page numbers look like. But if you have the chapters, then it should be from the chapter The Punnett Square up until Detention. Gerard says, do we start from Genetics 101 this week? I just finished the chapter Genetics 101, but you should start from wherever you left off reading. So if you finished reading that chapter, then you should start from the beginning of the next chapter, or if you're earlier than that, go ahead and start from there, or if you're later than that, then go ahead and start from wherever you started. Says you can get it on different stores. Yeah, I'm not sure which version everybody has. Evan says the pulse collar vibrates when you try to touch your face. Oh, interesting. I don't think I know enough about that to talk about making one, but that would be interesting to look into. Yeah, that would be really interesting. Okay, we're pretty much out of time. So if you have any last things that you wanted to talk about, any last questions that you have, go ahead and put them in now. Evan says search for Pulse. Okay, we're gonna wrap this up and then I'll search for Pulse after this. Gerard's asking about bought books versus borrowed books. On Kindle, you can either buy the book or you can borrow it. On Kindle, I think you can borrow some books, but then there are also other library apps you can borrow from. And that's definitely an easy way to get this book. Borrowed books are a fantastic way to get lots of reading in without having to buy lots of books, because that can get expensive. Okay, good. Well, that is pretty much all the time that we have. Let's go. I put in here that we would get through page 154 as this assignment, but I realized not everybody has the same version. So up to the chapter detention is the next assignment, okay? All right, that is all we're gonna talk about for this week, and I would love to hear your thoughts from Corey. Corey will be running the webinar again next week, but I'm gonna continue reading the book as well. So I hope you guys enjoy it just as much as I am, and I'll see you in the next webinar. Evan says, tell teacher Dylan that I greet him. I will let him know. Okay, goodbye everybody.